The days continued to pass in the Apache camp, each one blending into the next, and yet, each one felt like a step closer to something Emma hadn't fully understood yet. Her life had changed in ways she couldn't have predicted. At first she had fought it, fought the customs, fought the people, and most of all fought Zeke. But now, as the weeks stretched on, Emma found herself in a new rhythm. It wasn't her old life, and it never would be, but somehow she was learning to live with it. The changes inside her weren't just about survival anymore. They were about acceptance, accepting the people around her, accepting the land, and perhaps most surprisingly, accepting Zeke. The bond between them had grown in ways Emma hadn't expected. The more time they spent together, the more she saw past his stoic exterior. There was a kindness in him, a gentleness that only emerged in quiet moments away from the watchful eyes of the camp. It wasn't something she could explain, but it was there. One evening, after the sun had dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, Emma found herself standing on a small hill outside the camp. She had been spending more time alone lately, needing space to think, to reflect. The vast desert stretched before her, the stars glittering like diamonds in the night sky. She didn't know what she was searching for, but it felt like she was looking for some kind of peace that seemed so elusive in the chaos of her emotions. The wind tugged at her hair as she stood there, lost in thought. She thought about the life she had once known, the life she had been torn away from. She missed her family, her home, but the longer she stayed in the camp, the more she realized that she had changed. She wasn't the same woman who had arrived here weeks ago, scared and determined to escape. She had grown stronger, more resilient, and more willing to face the truth of her situation. As she stood there, her thoughts drifting, she felt a presence behind her. She turned, and there he was, Zeke. He had always been able to find her when she needed space, when she was retreating inward. It wasn't that he was following her. It was as if he could sense when she needed him. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there watching her with his dark eyes. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," Emma said quietly, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. "I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything's fine." Zeke didn't respond immediately. He stepped closer, his presence calm and steady. There was no urgency in his movements, just a quiet understanding that Emma couldn't explain. His hand, large and strong, reached out, and for a moment Emma froze. He gently placed it on her shoulder, a touch that was warm and reassuring but not overbearing. "You don't have to pretend," Zeke said softly, his voice low but steady. "You're allowed to feel how you feel." "It's not easy, I know." Emma's heart raced at the simplicity of his words. She had always been so guarded, so determined to keep her emotions hidden. But with him it felt different. For the first time, she didn't have to hold everything in. It was as if he saw through her defenses, saw the parts of her that she was too scared to show anyone else. And in that moment, she allowed herself to lean into the comfort of his presence. "I've never felt this torn in my life," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know if I should hate you or be grateful to you." Zeke's expression softened, though there was still a quiet strength in his eyes. "I don't want you to hate me," he said. "I only want you to see that you have a choice. You don't have to fight anymore. You don't have to be afraid." For a long time, Emma stood there, her back to him, feeling the weight of his words. She had spent so long resisting the life she had been given, fighting against the pull of this new world. But now, as she stood on the edge of the desert with Zeke behind her, she began to feel a shift. The anger, the fear, the confusion, they were still there, but they weren't all-consuming. They didn't define her anymore. "I don't know what my future is here," Emma said, her voice quieter now, almost to herself. "But I'm starting to think that maybe it's with you." Zeke's hand moved from her shoulder and he stepped around to face her, his eyes locked with hers. There was a deep unspoken connection between them, one that neither of them had acknowledged fully until now. It wasn't just the bond that had been forced upon them by the customs of the Apache people. It was something deeper, something real. "I never wanted to force you into anything," Zeke said, his voice thick with sincerity. "But I've come to realize that you are more than just my wife. You are a part of this tribe, a part of this life.
And
I care for you more than I've let on." Emma felt her heart skip a beat at his words. She had heard them before in small gestures and fleeting moments, but never like this, never with such honesty. She had always thought that Zeke was a man of few words, someone who didn't show his emotions easily. But now, as she looked into his eyes, she saw something different. She saw vulnerability, something she hadn't expected from the stoic warrior she had once feared. "I didn't know how to love someone like you," Emma whispered, her eyes dropping to the ground. "You're so different from anyone I've ever known. But I can't deny what's in my heart anymore." Zeke's expression softened further and he reached out, gently lifting her chin so she was looking at him once more. "You don't have to understand it all right away," he said. "But I want you to know that I'm here, and I'll be here no matter what." In that moment, everything seemed to fall into place for Emma. The confusion, the anger, the fear, they hadn't disappeared, but they no longer held the same power over her. She had been fighting so hard for so long, trying to keep her heart guarded, trying to resist the pull that she felt toward him. But now, as she stood there with Zeke, the truth was undeniable. There was a deep, undeniable connection between them. And though it wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, it was real. It was theirs. Without thinking, Emma stepped forward, closing the distance between them. She reached out and placed her hands on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingers. Zeke's arms wrapped around her, holding her close in the way he had so many times before. But this time it felt different. This time it wasn't just about survival. It was about something more, something that Emma couldn't put into words, but something that filled the space between them with an intensity that took her breath away. "I think I'm ready," she said softly, her voice steady now, filled with a quiet certainty. Zeke didn't say anything at first. He simply held her tighter, as though he had been waiting for this moment too. And in that quiet desert night, with the stars shining down on them and the warmth of the fire at their backs, Emma knew that she had found something she never thought she would find in this strange and foreign land. She had found a home, not just in the camp, but in Zeke's arms. And maybe, just maybe, she had found love. The days in the Apache camp grew warmer as summer approached. Emma had become more accustomed to her life among the people who had captured her, though she still felt like an outsider in many ways. The people of the camp had accepted her presence, but there was always a distance between her and them, a boundary that she couldn't cross. She wasn't one of them, and she didn't know if she ever could be. Yet over time, something inside her had begun to shift. Despite her best efforts to resist, she had started to care about the people she had once feared. The work, though difficult, had become part of her daily routine. She had learned to cook the food over the open fire, to gather herbs from the desert, and even to help with the tasks of the camp. The women had begun to treat her less like a captive and more like someone who was simply part of the camp, though there was still a certain wariness in their eyes when they looked at her. She could see it in the way they spoke among themselves, as if there was still something they were unsure about when it came to her. But it wasn't just the women who had started to treat her differently. Zeke, too, seemed to notice the change in her. At first, his gaze had been cold and distant, his presence more like that of a ruler than a husband. But as the weeks went by, Emma began to see the slightest shift in his behavior. He no longer looked at her with the same coldness. Instead, there was something else in his eyes. It was like he saw her as more than just a woman to be obeyed. He saw her as someone who had earned her place among the Apache. Yet, that realization only made Emma's situation more complicated. She had never wanted to be part of this life, but she was starting to understand the people around her in ways she hadn't expected. The Apache were strong, resilient, and proud. They had lived through hardships she couldn't even begin to imagine. Their loyalty to one another, their deep connection to the land, was something Emma had never truly understood before. And Zeke, though he was often distant and hard to read, was part of that strength. He was their leader, their protector, and in some strange way, he had become part of her world. One evening, after a long day of gathering wood and preparing food, Emma found herself sitting alone by the fire, her hands tired from the day's work. The camp was quiet, the stars above twinkling in the vast empty sky. She leaned back, allowing the warmth of the fire to soothe her aching muscles. Her mind was a mess of conflicting emotions, fear, anger, sadness, and something else, something she didn't want to name. She had been fighting it for so long, telling herself that she didn't belong here, that she would never accept this life. But it wasn't that simple anymore. The more time she spent with Zeke, the more she found herself drawn to him. He had a quiet strength about him, a calmness that was both comforting and unsettling. He had never been cruel to her, despite the fact that he had taken her from everything she knew. There was a complexity to him that Emma couldn't quite understand. but she couldn't deny that there was something about him that made her heart beat faster whenever their paths crossed. Zeke had always kept a distance between them, but it wasn't the kind of distance that made Emma feel unwanted. It was the kind of distance that came from respect, as though he was giving her the space she needed to adjust to her new life. He never pressured her, never demanded anything from her except to fulfill her role in the camp. But as time went on, Emma couldn't help but wonder if there was more to their connection than just the circumstances that had brought them together. One evening, as she sat by the fire, she felt his presence before she saw him. Zeke appeared beside her, his silhouette outlined against the firelight. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Emma felt the familiar tension in the air between them, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else, something she didn't have the words for. "You've been quiet lately," Zeke said, his voice calm and low. He sat beside her, not too close, but close enough that Emma could feel the warmth of his body radiating toward her. She didn't respond right away, unsure of what to say. It wasn't that she didn't want to talk to him. It was that she didn't know what to say. Her emotions were a jumble, and she wasn't sure she could sort them out. "I've been thinking," she said finally, her voice soft, "about everything. About this life. About you." Zeke's gaze didn't leave the fire, but Emma could feel his attention on her. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions. He simply waited for her to continue. "I never wanted this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I never wanted to be here, to be your wife. I don't know how to do this. I don't know if I ever will." Zeke turned to her then, his dark eyes meeting hers. There was no anger in his gaze, no judgment. Just something that might have been understanding. Or was it sympathy? Emma couldn't tell. "I didn't ask for this either," he said quietly. "But it is what it is, and we make the best of it." Emma felt a pang of frustration. "How can you be so calm about all of this?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "How can you just accept it?" Zeke didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her with a steady gaze, his expression softening. "Because I've learned that life doesn't always go the way we expect. We have to make choices even when they aren't the ones we would have made on our own." Emma stared at him, taking in his words. There was a wisdom in his voice, a deep understanding of the way the world worked that she hadn't expected from him. She realized then that Zeke had never seen her as just a captive. He had seen her as someone who had been thrown into an impossible situation, just like him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled between them, and the desert night stretched out endless and quiet. Emma felt her heart racing in her chest, a mixture of emotions swirling inside her. Part of her still wanted to escape, to run far away from this life. But another part of her, the part she tried so hard to ignore, felt a connection to Zeke that she couldn't deny. It wasn't love, not yet at least, but it was something. A bond had formed between them, and no matter how hard she tried to fight it, Emma could feel it pulling her toward him. She didn't want to admit it, didn't want to acknowledge it, but the truth was undeniable. Something had changed. "I'm sorry," Zeke said quietly, breaking the silence. "I didn't mean to make you feel like you have no choice. You do. You always have." Emma's throat tightened and she swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for taking me," she whispered. "But maybe I can learn to live with it. Maybe I can learn to accept this life." Zeke nodded, his gaze steady and unflinching. "That's all I ask," he said softly. Emma looked at him then, really looked at him for the first time. She saw not just the warrior, the leader, but the man who had been shaped by a lifetime of struggles and choices. He wasn't perfect. No one was. But in that moment, Emma realized that he had never forced her into anything. He had simply made her part of his world, just as the Apache had made her part of theirs. The bond between them was still fragile, still uncertain, but it was there. And for the first time since she had been taken, Emma felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected, a sense of belonging. Not to the land, not to the camp, but to the people, to Zeke. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment it didn't matter. She was here and she would face whatever came next. Days blurred into weeks, and Emma slowly began to adjust to the strange new world around her. At first, she resisted every part of her new life, clinging to the hope that somehow she could escape. But as the days passed, the reality of her situation set in, and she realized there was no easy way out. She was stuck, trapped in a place she didn't understand, surrounded by people who lived by rules and customs that were so different from her own. Zeke had made it clear from the beginning that she was his now, but that didn't make her feel any more at ease. Despite the way he looked at her, as though she were already a part of his world, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. Every moment felt like she was out of place, like an actor in a play whose role she didn't know. Life in the Apache camp was harsh, but there was an order to it that Emma slowly began to recognize. The women worked together, preparing food, tending to the fires, and taking care of the children. The warriors, like Zeke, were focused on maintaining the security of the camp, hunting and practicing their skills. There was a rhythm to their existence, an unspoken understanding between them, but Emma never felt like she could fully be a part of it. At first, the other women treated her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. They didn't speak to her much, but their eyes would often meet hers, sizing her up. Emma wasn't sure what they saw when they looked at her. Did they pity her? Resent her? Or were they simply used to newcomers like her, the outsiders who were taken by the warriors and brought into their world? One woman named Tala was the first to speak to Emma. She was tall, with long black hair and a strong build, a woman who carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that made Emma feel both intimidated and strangely comforted. "Do not be afraid," Tala said one evening as she approached Emma near the fire. Emma was sitting by herself as usual, her gaze fixed on the flames, lost in her thoughts. Tala sat beside her, folding her legs gracefully under her. "I'm not afraid," Emma said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm angry. I don't belong here. I don't want to be here." Tala studied her for a moment, her dark eyes kind but not without a hint of sadness. "It is hard, yes, to be taken from everything you know, but you will learn. The land, the people, they will teach you in time." Emma shook her head. "I don't want to learn. I just want to go home." Tala's lips curled slightly, but it wasn't a smile. "Home is far away now, Emma. The desert is your home now. The Apache are your family now. There is no going back." Emma was silent for a long time, staring at the fire. Tala's words had settled deep within her, echoing in her mind. Home was far away. She had known that for days now, but hearing it from someone else made it feel even more real. Over time, Emma began to feel the weight of Tala's words more and more. She watched the women of the camp go about their work, with a sense of unity and purpose that she had never known before. They didn't question their place. They didn't fight against it. It was as though the Apache way of life had a rhythm to it, one that Emma struggled to find. But she had no choice but to try. Despite her inner resistance, Emma couldn't deny that the camp, though harsh, was a place of its own order. The warriors and women worked together, each fulfilling a role in the tribe's survival. There was a strange beauty in the simplicity of their life, the way everything had a purpose, even the harsh conditions of the desert. As time passed, Emma became more involved in the daily tasks of the camp. She helped prepare the food, though she never quite felt comfortable with the cooking methods. She learned how to gather herbs, how to keep the fires burning, and how to care for the few animals they had. It wasn't the life she had dreamed of, but it was the life she had been forced into. Zeke, too, became a part of her world, though she still couldn't figure him out. He was a man of few words and even fewer emotions. He led the warriors with an unyielding authority, and when he spoke, others listened. He didn't demand respect, he simply commanded it with his presence. And yet, despite his power, there was something about him that softened when he looked at Emma. At times, she caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, his gaze steady and thoughtful. She couldn't understand why he seemed so intent on her, but she felt the pull of his attention whether she liked it or not. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the air grew cooler, Emma found herself near the edge of the camp again. She was standing on a small hill, gazing out at the endless desert stretching before her. The quiet of the evening was soothing, and for a moment she felt like she could forget where she was. But then she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Zeke approaching, his dark eyes meeting hers. He said nothing at first, just stood there, his presence filling the space between them. "You seem different," he said after a long silence, his voice as calm and steady as always. "You are becoming one of us." Emma didn't know how to respond to that. She had never wanted to be one of them. She had never wanted to belong to this place, to this life. And yet, with each passing day, she found herself learning more and more. She was becoming something she hadn't intended. "I don't want to belong here," she said, her voice sharp, though there was no anger behind it. It was simply the truth. "I want to go home. To my life." Zeke's eyes softened slightly, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "Home is where you make it," he said quietly. "This is your home now. The people of this land will be your family, whether you accept it or not." Emma looked away, feeling a mixture of frustration and sadness. She didn't want this. She didn't want to belong to this place, to this man, to this life. But somehow Zeke's words made sense in a way she hadn't expected. The Apache were different, yes, but they had something she didn't. They had a bond, a connection to the land, to each other. It wasn't the life she had wanted, but it was the life she had been given. As the days turned into weeks, Emma began to feel the stirrings of something she hadn't expected, something she wasn't ready for. There was a strange warmth that began to grow inside her when she saw Zeke, a pull she couldn't deny. She tried to push it away, tried to convince herself that it was nothing, but the truth was every time he looked at her, every time their eyes met across the camp, she felt it. A bond had begun to form between them, whether she wanted it or not. Emma wasn't sure if it was something she could ever accept, but deep down she knew that it wasn't something she could fight forever. This life, this man, had changed her in ways she didn't fully understand. And despite all her resistance, the pull of it was undeniable. The first light of morning filtered through the canvas of the camp, casting a soft glow across the desert. Emma awoke, her head still groggy, the events of the previous day rushing back to her all at once. She sat up quickly, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The wind whispered through the camp, and the faint sounds of the Apache warriors moving about reached her ears. She looked around and, for a fleeting second, felt the heavy weight of fear in her chest again. It wasn't a nightmare. It was real. She wasn't in a safe house or in her uncle's ranch as she had imagined. She was in a strange camp, surrounded by strangers, with no idea what they would do to her. Her body ached from the long walk through the desert, and her thoughts were a tangle of confusion. Slowly, Emma stood, her legs stiff from sleeping on the hard ground. She glanced around, trying to make sense of her surroundings. The morning air was cool, and the sun was only beginning to rise, casting a pale light over the camp. There were several tents, simple and made of animal hides, scattered around a central fire pit. The warriors were already awake, preparing for the day, gathering around the fire, sharpening weapons, and talking amongst themselves in their native language. Emma's eyes locked on Zeke, who stood near the fire talking with another warrior. His broad shoulders and powerful frame were unmistakable even from a distance. His posture was straight, confident, and he commanded the attention of everyone around him. There was something about him, something in the way he moved, in the way people respected him. That unsettled Emma. She couldn't quite place it, but he had an air of authority that was undeniable. As her thoughts swirled, Emma became painfully aware of the situation she was in. She was alone in a foreign land, and the people who had taken her were not interested in letting her go. She stood for a moment, frozen, unsure of what to do. Her fear was almost overwhelming, and for a few seconds she simply wanted to close her eyes and disappear. But that wasn't possible. She had to face reality. A few of the women from the camp began moving around, gathering firewood and preparing food. They seemed to ignore Emma, as if her presence was an everyday occurrence. The warriors, too, were going about their tasks without paying her any mind. But as Emma stood there, feeling more and more like an outsider, she caught Zeke's eyes. He was looking directly at her, his dark gaze sharp and observant. Emma's heart skipped a beat, and for a brief moment she felt a strange shiver run down her spine. Zeke didn't speak. He didn't even move, but there was something in his eyes that made Emma's pulse quicken. She quickly looked away, afraid he might see the fear in her eyes. What did he want from her? Why had he taken her? These questions ran through her mind, and the uncertainty of it all made her feel trapped. She turned away and walked slowly to the edge of the camp, away from the gaze of the warriors. Her mind was racing. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but she knew that wouldn't do her any good. She had no power here, no control. She was at the mercy of these people, and the idea of being trapped in this place made her stomach churn. Her feet took her to a small rock outcrop near the camp, where she sat down, Hugging her knees to her chest, she stared at the horizon, the vast desert stretching out endlessly before her. It felt so lonely, so empty. She thought of her life back home, the family she loved, and the comfortable life she had once taken for granted. How could this have happened? How could she have gone from living in a city full of people to sitting alone in a desert, surrounded by strangers who saw her as nothing more than a prize to be claimed? It didn't make sense. Minutes passed, but Emma didn't notice the time. She was lost in thought, trying to wrap her head around everything that had happened. It wasn't until the sound of footsteps approached that she was startled back to reality. She looked up, and there he was, Zeke. He stood in front of her, towering over her as usual, his expression unreadable. She couldn't understand him, couldn't fathom what was going on inside his mind. He was a man of few words, and when he spoke, it was often in a way that made her feel small, insignificant, like she had no choice but to obey. "I will show you the ways of the camp," Zeke said, his voice steady and calm. "You must learn how to live here. There is no going back." His words hit Emma like a wave, drowning her in a mixture of anger and fear. She stood up quickly, pushing back against the stone, her face flushed with frustration. "I don't want to live here," she shot back. "I want to go home. I don't belong here. This is not my life." Zeke's dark eyes studied her, but there was no anger in his gaze. There was no cruelty. Instead, he looked at her like a man watching someone come to terms with a difficult truth. "You do belong here now. You were chosen," he said, his voice low. But there was a certain finality in it. Emma wanted to scream, to argue, to fight against the reality of it all. But deep down, she knew that this wasn't something she could fight her way out of. She didn't know the customs of the Apache, the rules they lived by, but it was clear they had their own way of doing things. She didn't know how to escape, and even if she did, where would she go? The desert was vast, and she had no idea how far from civilization she was. Zeke didn't say anything else. He just stood there waiting for her to accept the truth, even if she wasn't ready to. After a long silence, Zeke motioned for her to follow him. Emma hesitated for a moment, but then reluctantly she did. She had no choice but to listen, no choice but to go with him. As they walked back to the camp, Emma noticed the others going about their business, seemingly unaffected by the tension in the air. The women, with their graceful movements, went about their duties as though nothing was unusual. Some of them glanced at Emma curiously, but no one said anything. Zeke led her to a small fire pit near the center of the camp. It was surrounded by a circle of large stones. A few of the women were already there, preparing the morning meal. One of them, a woman with long black hair and sharp, intelligent eyes, smiled at Emma. She didn't say anything, but there was a warmth in her expression that gave Emma a small sense of comfort. Zeke spoke to the woman in the Apache language, and she nodded, gesturing for Emma to sit by the fire. Emma hesitated but sat down, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. She was surrounded by people she didn't understand, in a world that felt foreign and dangerous. The woman handed Emma a bowl of food, and though Emma was starving, she couldn't bring herself to eat. She pushed the food around in the bowl, lost in her thoughts, while Zeke stood nearby watching over the camp. His presence was always there, like a shadow she couldn't escape. And for the first time, Emma realized that she wasn't just a captive anymore. She was something else, a part of this strange world, whether she wanted to be or not. The silence stretched on, and Emma felt the weight of it in her chest. She didn't know how to accept this life. She didn't know if she ever could, but she had no choice. She was here now, and she had to find a way to survive in this unfamiliar world. It was a sunny afternoon when Emma first set foot on the dusty road leading to her uncle's ranch. The stagecoach she was traveling in rolled along the rugged terrain, its wheels creaking with each bump and jolt. Emma gazed out of the small window, watching the wide, open landscape stretch out before her. She was from a family with money, accustomed to comforts, but something about the vastness of the desert intrigued her. The silence, the stillness, it was all so different from the crowded city life she had left behind. Her uncle had written to her about the ranch, and she was eager to see it for herself. He spoke of the peaceful life in the country, far from the chaos of city living. She was looking forward to the change, to a break from her usual routine. Little did Emma know her trip would take a turn she never could have imagined. The stagecoach slowed as it approached a narrow part of the road. surrounded by towering rock formations and dry, dusty ground. Emma's thoughts wandered as the horses' hooves clattered on the hard ground. Suddenly, the peaceful silence was shattered by the sound of war cries. Out of nowhere, a group of Apache warriors appeared, riding fast on horseback, their faces painted with streaks of black and red. They surrounded the stagecoach in seconds. The driver shouted in panic, trying to turn the horses around, but it was too late. The warriors were too fast. Emma's heart raced as she looked out the window, her stomach tightening with fear. The stagecoach came to a stop, and before Emma could even understand what was happening, a powerful hand pulled open the door. One of the warriors yanked her out of the coach with surprising strength. She gasped, struggling to break free, but his grip was firm. His dark eyes looked at her with something unreadable. Was it pity? Indifference? She couldn't tell. "Stay quiet," he commanded in a deep, calm voice. Emma froze, her breath caught in her throat. She was frightened, but she wasn't sure what to expect. Would they rob her and leave her stranded? Or was something more dangerous going to happen? The warriors didn't seem to be interested in the other passengers. They gathered them together, taking their belongings without a word. Emma watched, her pulse racing as they rummaged through bags and crates. Then one of the warriors, this man, spoke again, his voice low but confident. "Bring her with us." Emma's heart pounded. She was being taken. She didn't know where or why, but it was clear they had plans for her. As she was led away from the stagecoach, her mind raced. She thought of her family, her uncle's ranch, the life she had left behind. Would she ever see it again? The fear grew inside her as the warriors led her deeper into the desert, toward their camp. For what felt like hours, they walked in silence. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows on the ground, and Emma's thoughts swirled with a mix of fear and confusion. Who were these people? Why had they taken her? She couldn't understand what was happening, and every step she took felt heavier, like she was walking toward some fate she had no control over. Finally, they arrived at a camp. The air was thick with the scent of smoke from a fire, and several Apache women moved about preparing food and other tasks. Emma's heart sank as she looked around. The camp was simple but organized, with tents made from animal hides and scattered supplies. The warriors stood near the fire, talking among themselves in their native language. The man who had grabbed her, the one with the dark eyes, spoke to the others, gesturing toward her. They nodded, but none of them seemed particularly surprised to see her. It was as though they expected her arrival. "You are with me now," the man said again, his voice steady and commanding. He placed his hand on her arm, his grip gentle but firm. "You will stay here." Emma looked at him, her confusion turning to anger. She wasn't going to just accept this. She wasn't going to stay in some strange camp, surrounded by people who had taken her against her will. "Who are you?" she demanded, pulling away from his grasp. "What do you want with me?" The man's expression remained unreadable, though there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something she couldn't quite place. "I am Zeke," he replied simply. "And you are mine now." Emma's eyes widened in shock. "What do you mean I'm yours?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You can't just take me." Zeke didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at her quietly as though weighing his words. The other warriors around the campfire didn't seem to be paying much attention. It was as though this was some normal occurrence for them, something that had happened before. "You will learn," Zeke said at last. "You have been chosen." Emma's mind raced. What was this? What kind of place had she been brought to? She had heard rumors of Apache customs, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Nothing had prepared her for the cold certainty in Zeke's voice. "You can't just decide this for me," she cried, her voice rising with panic. "I want to go back home. I want to leave." Zeke stepped closer, his dark eyes never leaving hers. "There is no going back," he said softly. "You are here now, and you will stay." Emma's pulse quickened. There was no escape. She realized that now. She didn't know what he meant by chosen, but the weight of his words settled heavily on her shoulders. She had no choice but to stay. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to twinkle in the clear desert sky, Emma was given a place to sleep near the campfire. The warmth of the flames barely soothed her fears as she lay on the ground, unable to sleep. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and fear, her heart racing in her chest. She glanced around the camp, watching the people moving about, speaking in their quiet, foreign language. The women didn't seem to notice her, and the men were busy with their own tasks. Zeke was sitting near the fire speaking with another warrior, but his eyes occasionally flicked toward her. Each time her heart would skip a beat. As the night grew darker, Emma couldn't help but feel a strange pull, an uneasy calm settling in her chest. The silence of the desert was deafening. She had no idea what would happen next, but one thing was clear. Her life had changed in ways she couldn't yet understand. And she didn't know if she was ready for what lay ahead. But as the wind picked up and the desert night grew colder, Emma closed her eyes. For just a moment, the chaos of the day faded, and she let her exhaustion take over. She didn't realize it then, but the road ahead would be much harder than she ever imagined, and the man who had captured her, the one named Zeke, would play a far bigger role in her life than she ever expected.